We often think of old maps as just clumsy sketches by ignorant people who simply didn't sail far enough. But that's not true. For 400 years, from 1300 to 1700, remember that number, Europe's best cartographers consistently depicted the same landmass at the very center of the North Pole. It was an enormous continent, 4 islands divided by rivers, with a black, mountain-sized rock at its heart. They called it Terra Septentrionalis, the northern land. Mercator drew it, Ortelius drew it, as did the Dutch, the Spanish, and the English. 300 cartographers, from different eras, different schools, and using different technologies, all placed the same land in the same spot. Then, in just 50 years, it vanished. First from English maps, then from French ones. By 1700, the North Pole was suddenly empty, ice, a void, and not a single cartographer in the world ever wrote about where this continent, which they had drawn for 4 centuries, had gone. No one explained, no one apologized, it was simply erased. What's truly strange is that we have no source explaining where this continent came from in the first place. No expedition, no discoverer, no specific date. It simply appeared on maps, fully formed, with rivers, a mountain, and names, as if someone knew, and then stopped knowing. Duisburg, a small German town on the Rhine, February 1595. In a workshop on the 2nd floor of a stone house, the air is thick with the scent of linseed oil and copper. This smell has permeated every wall. Outside, the temperature is -10 degrees Celsius. The windows are frozen from within. Inside, an elderly man in a black cap leans over a copper plate. He is 82 years old and will die in a few months. His name is Gerhard Mercator. He is engraving a map that the world will copy for another 100 years. At the center of this map is no void, but a continent. 4 enormous islands, arranged in a circle like petals. Between them flow 4 rivers, converging at the center. And at the very heart, a black rock. Mercator labels it in Latin, Rupes nigra et altissima, the black and highest rock. Its height is noted as 33 French miles, approximately 100 kilometers. Pause for a second. This wasn't drawn by a mad monk in a basement. This was drawn by the era's foremost cartographer, a man whose name still defines the projection used by airplanes today. And this is what he writes in the margins of the map, literally in his own hand, with ink. These details I took from a book called Inventio Fortunata, written by an English Franciscan friar from Oxford around 1360. He himself traveled north and saw this land with his own eyes. The book Inventio Fortunata, Fortunate Discovery, indeed existed. Half a dozen authors from the 15th and 16th centuries refer to it. It was quoted, paraphrased, and known by Columbus, who mentioned it in his letters. Mercator himself held it, writing that he obtained the text from the Flemish geographer Jacob Conoyen. And now, for the chilling part, this book is gone. Not a single copy, not a single page, not a single original leaf remains. All references are to copies of copies, and all those copies are lost. The book that for 400 years dictated what the top of the world looked like no longer exists in any library on the planet. Mercator's contemporaries questioned its disappearance. The English mathematician John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's astrologer, personally sought the text, scoured the archives of Oxford, wrote to Antwerp, pleading, begging, bargaining. Nothing. One monk told him that his grandfather had seen the book in the royal library. The grandfather died, the book disappeared, a dead end. One might dismiss it as a legend, a mystery, and forget about it. But Mercator's map holds more than just one continent. There's something else. If you look closely at the northern coast, where modern-day Siberia and Canada lie, the coastline roughly matches reality. Not perfectly, but it matches where Mercator, in principle, had no right to know about it. The Bering Strait wouldn't be discovered for another 150 years. Where did he get this information? The most poignant aspect of this story is that Mercator was not a fantasist. He was a pedant. He verified coordinates 3 times. He refused to draw anything he wasn't certain about. In places of unknown lands, his maps honestly state terra incognita, in Latin, unknown land. But at the pole, there's no incognita. At the pole are specific 4 islands, specific rivers, a specific mountain 100 kilometers high, labeled, numbered, with names. The man who spent his life fearing mistakes, at the most crucial point on Earth, drew something he had never seen and died 6 months after completing this engraving, calmly, confidently, leaving no explanations. If you're finding this intriguing, please give this video a like. It truly helps the channel, and it costs you nothing. Also, subscribe, because things are about to get even stranger. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm curious who's reading this at midnight and who's enjoying it with their morning coffee, because in our next story, we won't be in Germany or the 16th century. We'll travel 1,000 years earlier to a monastery where an Irish monk records what he saw in the ice. And his entry, word for word, matches what Mercator would draw 700 years later. The year is 825, a monastery on the island of Iona, off the west coast of Scotland. A stone cell with no window. The only light source is an oil lamp that smokes and smells of fish oil. Outside, the Atlantic. In winter, it's so damp that ink freezes on the quill. The monk's name is Dicuil. He is Irish, around 60, and he is writing a book called Liber de Mensura Orbis Terrae, book on the measurement of the Earth's circle. Dicuil collects sailors' tales, and one account from Irish monks who journeyed far north he records verbatim. A translation from Latin. 30 years ago, our brethren sailed to an island, which they believed lay at the very edge of the world. At the summer solstice, the sun did not set at all, and at midnight, a man could pick lice from his shirt as if in daylight. This is Iceland. Today, we know for certain it's Iceland. Irish monks reached it in leather boats 100 years before the Vikings. But Dicuil has another entry, and this is where everything breaks down. He writes that beyond this island, further north, a day's journey away, the brethren saw a large land with a tall black mountain at its center, and the water around that mountain, they said, flowed downwards into the earth's depths with a great roar. The monks named the place Thule, and returned because they were afraid. Remember 3 details: a black mountain, water flowing into the depths, 4 streams around it. 700 years later, Mercator would draw exactly this: a black rock, 4 rivers flowing inwards, water which, according to his inscription, plunges into the earth's depths with such force that no ship can return. Coincidence? Perhaps Mercator could have read Dicuil. Manuscript copies of the book on measurement circulated among European monasteries. The cartographer could have taken the description and transferred it to his map. But there's a problem. Dicuil didn't invent. He recorded what sailors who had been there told him. These sailors described a place that, according to our maps, does not exist, and they described it in such detail that 700 years later, another man could draw it, and his drawing matched the description in every detail. That is the story of Dicuil and Mercator, a chain of retellings 700 years long, and at the end of that chain, the same black mountain. One could simply dismiss this as a legend, a recurring motif, but in 1577, something happened that shatters the legend theory. The English navigator, Martin Frobisher, returned from his second voyage to the northern seas. He was searching for the Northwest Passage, a route to China through the Canadian ice. He didn't find it, but he brought back a journal, and in that journal, there's a description of a place north of Baffin Island. I quote a translation. "The waters here move with great force to the north, and swirl as in a great cauldron, and they seem to me to go beneath the ice." Frobisher hadn't read Dicuil. He was a military sailor, not a scholar. He hadn't seen Mercator's map in the edition that included the inscription about waters flowing into the depths. That edition came out later. He simply described what he saw. And what he saw was a whirlpool, a massive polar gyre of warm and cold water, which today we call thermohaline circulation. It's a real phenomenon. The waters of the North Atlantic do indeed sink in the region of Greenland to depths of 2 to 3 kilometers. Not into the Earth's core, of course, but they do descend. This is the bitter irony. Irish monks in the 9th century observed a real oceanic process and described it in the language of their time. Water flows into the depths. Dicuil recorded it. 700 years later, Mercator placed this on a map, literally as a geographical feature, as four rivers flowing into a whole. It wasn't an invented continent. It was a misunderstood observation, solidified on a map as land. But there's a nuance that this elegant answer doesn't explain. Dicuil writes about land, not a whirlpool, land with a mountain. And the monks, he says, saw it. Even if they didn't reach it, they saw it from a distance. A black silhouette on the horizon north of Iceland, where today, there's open water and floating ice. And this is where things get truly strange. Because in 1380, 200 years before Mercator, and 500 years after Dicuil, two Venetian brothers named Zeno sailed north and also saw something. They drew a map. On that map, an island between Iceland and Greenland. They called it Frisland. This island does not exist at all today. No reef, no shoal, nothing. The Atlantic in that spot is 4 kilometers deep, but the Zeno brothers described it in such detail, with harbors, cities, rivers, that European navigators for 200 years seriously searched for Frisland, equipping expeditions, perishing in storms, returning with nothing. And here's the question we still have no answer to. What did they see? Venice, 1558. A house on a canal, cluttered with 300-year-old papers. On the floor are torn letters, so decayed they resemble cobwebs. By the window sits a man named Niccolo Zeno the Younger. He is around 50. He has just discovered a stack of letters in his family archive that his great-great-grandfather received from his brother 200 years ago. The letters crumble in his hands. Niccolo later confessed, "As a child, I didn't understand their value and tore most of them while playing." He literally ripped up the documents as a child, and now he's trying to reconstruct them. From the remnants, he compiles a book and a map. The book is called On the Voyages of the Two Zeno Brothers to the Northern Seas. According to it, in 1380, the Venetian brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno traveled north at the invitation of a certain Prince Zikmni, ruler of islands somewhere between Scotland and Iceland. For 12 years, they sailed the North Atlantic, saw Greenland, saw an island called Frisland, and another called Icaria, and lands they called Estotiland and Drogeo, somewhere far to the west. The map published by Niccolo the Younger fell into the hands of Mercator, Ortelius, and all the cartographers of Europe. From 1560 onwards, Frisland appeared on every second map of the world, a large island between Iceland and Scotland, with cities, names, and a coastline. For 200 years, Frisland was sought. For 200 years, it wasn't found. The English privateer Francis Drake searched for it, as did Martin Frobisher, who in 1578 recorded in his journal that he landed on Frisland. Although, as we now understand, he actually landed on the southern tip of Greenland. The map simply said Frisland, and he believed the map, not his eyes. That was the wild power of cartography at the time. If it was printed on the map, it existed. A sailor could stand on the shore, see Greenland, and believe it was Frisland because the map was more important than reality. If you're finding this interesting and have read this far, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel, and I can see who makes it to the middle. Also, tell me in the comments if you believe the Zeno brothers truly saw something, or if it was a 16th century forgery. I'm very interested in your opinion, because historians have been debating this for 150 years and still haven't agreed. Now for the most interesting part. In 1835, the Danish historian Carl Christian Raffin took the Zeno book and compared it with the real geography of the North Atlantic, discovering something strange. Some of the descriptions were eerily accurate. Descriptions of the Faroe Islands matched. Descriptions of Icelandic harbors matched. The description of the Greenlandic coast with the monastery of St. Thomas matched a real medieval Norwegian monastery, about which 16th century Venice could not have known. The monastery had been abandoned long before the book's publication. Its location was only rediscovered in the 20th century. This means Niccolo the Younger, sitting in Venice in 1558, published details that could not have been invented. They could only have been recorded from someone who had been there. But what about Frisland? Frisland is gone. What happened, according to Raffin and later historians? The Zeno brothers did indeed travel north in 1380, but not for 12 years and not that far. They visited the Faroes. In Italian of that time, Faroes sounded like Frisland. meaning Frisian land. Niccolo the Younger, 200 years later, reconstructing the torn letters, incorrectly pieced together the fragments. He took the description of the pharaohs for a separate, large island and drew it as such, enormous, the size of Iceland. That's all Frisland was. A misreading, a faulty assembly, an error by one person who played with letters as a child. But Mercator didn't know this, and for 200 years, no one knew. For 200 years, Frisland lived on maps. For 200 years, people died searching for it in the North Atlantic. For 200 years, cartographers copied it from each other, adding their own details. One added a river, another a port, a third a city. Frisland grew on paper, fed not by reality, but by copies of itself. And here's the bitter irony that makes you want to hide your face in your hands. When, in the early 18th century, Frisland finally began to be erased from maps, no one wrote why. There was no grand announcement. Gentlemen, we were wrong for 200 years. Our apologies. It was simply quietly removed, first from one map, then from another. By 1750, it was almost gone. By 1800, it had completely vanished, as if it had never existed. Just like Terra Septentrionalis, just like the Black Mountain, just like the rivers flowing into the depths. 18th and 19th century cartography conducted a great, silent purge. It didn't explain, didn't repent, didn't comment. It simply erased everything that couldn't be confirmed, and along with the phantoms, perhaps it erased something else, something that existed, but didn't fit into the new, rational, measured worldview. Because there is one more continent on old maps, and it is the most terrifying of all. It wasn't written about by monks, Venetians, or Mercator. It was written about by the ancient Greeks. And the description of this continent matches what was only discovered in the 20th century, beneath the ice. Constantinople, 1513, the Sultan's palace chancery, a narrow room, windows barred. On the table, parchment made from gazelle hide, scraped until translucent. A man in a green turban bends over the parchment. He is the admiral of the Turkish fleet. His name is Piri Reis. 30 years later, he will be executed by order of the Sultan, beheaded for military failures. But now, in 1513, he is drawing a map of the world. Only a fragment of it, a third of the original, has reached us. It was found by chance, in 1929, in the library of Topkapi Palace. An employee stumbled upon it while sorting old papers. The map shows the coast of Africa, the coast of South America, and at the bottom, a long coastline stretching from east to west, ice-free, with rivers and mountains. This is Antarctica. More precisely, it is Queen Maud Land, the northern coast of Antarctica facing Africa, the part of it that is now covered by a layer of ice half a kilometer thick. Antarctica, as a continent, would officially be discovered in 1820, 300 years after Piri Reis drew it. The sub-ice coastline would only be mapped in 1949, using echo sounding by a Swedish, British, Norwegian expedition. When the echo sounding data was compared to Piri Reis's map, the coastline matched. Not perfectly, but enough for the American cartographer Arlington Mallory, who made the comparison, to drop his smoking pipe. This is a documented scene. In 1965, Professor Charles Hapgood from Keene College in New Hampshire published a book. He assembled a team of his students, and for 3 years, they cross-referenced Piri Reis's map with modern data. The conclusion: the map depicts rivers and mountain ranges of Queen Maud Land that are today buried under ice. How could a Turkish admiral have known this in 1513? Hapgood couldn't answer. Piri Reis himself, in the margins of his map, he liked to make notes in the margins. Like Mercator, writes the following, translated from Turkish. This map was compiled by me, from 20 old maps and 8 mappamundi. One of the maps belonged to Columbus. Others date back to the time of Alexander the Great, 4th century BCE. Let's pause for a second. A Turkish admiral in 1513 claims to have an 1800-year-old map on his table, and on that map is a continent that Europe would officially discover 300 years later, and which by 1513 was almost certainly already under ice, just as it is today. What do we do with this? There's a cautious answer. Hapgood exaggerated. The coastline matches are not as precise as he thought. What he took for Antarctica is actually a distorted representation of the South American coast, bent eastward due to the specific projection Reis used. Some researchers today believe this to be true, and it's possibly correct. Possibly, but there's a problem. Reis's map is not unique. In 1531, the French cartographer Oronteus Phineas printed a world map. On it, at the bottom, is a separate, circular continent the size of Australia, with rivers flowing from the center to the coast, ice-free. Phineas labels it Terra Australis Recens Inventa, sed nondum plane cognita, southern land, recently discovered, but not yet fully explored. Recently discovered, in 1531, 290 years before the official discovery of Antarctica. And then there's another map by Philippe Bouaché, a French cartographer, 1737. He draws Antarctica not as a solid continent, but as two large islands separated by a strait running through the entire landmass. Under the ice, as we know today, Antarctica indeed consists of two continental masses, separated by a system of basins that, without the ice, would be a sea strait. This was discovered by Soviet and American geophysicists in the 1960s. Bouaché drew this in 1737. He couldn't have seen it. The ice has been there for at least 1 million years. One could start talking about ancient civilizations, aliens, and Atlantis. I won't. That's too simple. There is a more boring, more bitter answer, and it goes something like this. Ancient and medieval cartography knew far more than we imagine. Knowledge was collected over millennia by Phoenicians, Egyptians, Greeks, Arabs, Chinese. This knowledge was stored in great libraries. The Library of Alexandria burned in several stages between the 1st century BCE and the 6th century CE. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad was plundered by the Mongols in 1258. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris, and the river, according to contemporaries, ran black with ink for several days. Byzantine archives dispersed after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Each time, knowledge perished. Knowledge accumulated by people who sailed further than we think, saw more, remembered, recorded, and something, crumbs, fragments, pieces of parchment, survived, was resold, copied, and fell into the hands of a Turkish admiral, a Flemish cartographer, or a monk on the island of Iona. Each drew what they saw in the fragment, without understanding the context, not knowing how to connect the pieces. And here is the philosophical blow that makes one fall silent. We are accustomed to thinking of history as a staircase. Below are caves, above are we, with our satellites and GPS. Each generation knows more than the last. Progress, progress, progress. But maps tell a different story. Maps say that someone, sometime, knew more than us. At least in one specific area, they knew and then lost it. And the descendants of that person, flipping through fragments, drew non-existent continents in the place of real ones, and real continents in the place of what isn't there. This applies to you today, right now, because in this very moment, somewhere, a library is burning, an archive is closing, an old person is dying who alone remembered a recipe, a route, a name. And 300 years from now, our great-grandchildren will be looking through our Google Maps with the same bewilderment with which we look at Terra Septentrionalis, asking what they saw there in that empty spot. Knowledge does not accumulate linearly. It flows like water in a river, and sometimes plunges into the earth's depths with a great roar, just like the Irish monks described at their Black Mountain. If you've made it this far, thank you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video.